The twin moons of Kepler 442b cast long shadows across New Terra City as Dr. Maya Washington locked the doors of the Colonial Science Institute. The building stood quiet now, but just hours ago it had buzzed with activity as she and her team worked late into the night. They were studying samples from the northern continent, trying to understand how the alien plants there could survive in such harsh conditions. Maya rubbed her tired eyes and walked toward her hover car in the empty parking lot. At 42 years old, she had spent half her life studying alien worlds, but this planet still amazed her every day. The purple grass swayed in the gentle breeze, and the strange blue flowers that only bloomed at night were just starting to open their petals. She climbed into her car and started the engine. The soft hum filled the quiet night as she pulled out onto the main road. New Terra City looked different at night. During the day, it was busy with colonists going about their work building humanity's new home among the stars, but at night it felt peaceful and full of promise. Maya lived in the Hills District, where many of the colony's top scientists and administrators had their homes. She had earned her place there through years of hard work. After finishing her studies on Earth, she had volunteered for the dangerous journey to this new world. For 15 years, she had worked to understand the planet's ecosystem and help humanity settle here safely. The drive home usually took 20 minutes, but tonight Maya drove slowly. She was thinking about tomorrow's big announcement. The colonial governor had chosen her to be the new federal judge for this sector. It was a huge honor and responsibility. She would be the first person of color to hold such a high position in the colonial government. As she turned onto Maple Street, her own street, Maya noticed a security patrol car behind her. This was normal. The colonial security force kept the wealthy district safe with regular patrols. She waved at the officers as she often did when she saw them in her neighborhood. But instead of waving back, the patrol car's lights began flashing red and blue. Maya felt confused. She had been driving carefully, well within the speed limit. Her car was registered properly and all her documents were current. She pulled over to the side of the road and waited, her hands visible on the steering wheel just as her father had taught her years ago on Earth. Two officers got out of the patrol car. The first was a tall white man with short brown hair and cold blue eyes. His name tag read Murphy. The second officer was shorter, with black hair and an unfriendly expression. His tag said Lee. Officer Murphy walked up to Maya's window, his hand resting on his weapon. "License and registration," he demanded without any greeting. "Good evening, officers," Maya said politely, reaching slowly for her documents. "May I ask why you stopped me?" "Just give me your papers," Murphy replied harshly. Maya handed over her identification card and vehicle registration. Both documents clearly showed her name, address, and occupation. Murphy studied them for a long time, then passed them to Officer Lee. "Dr. Maya Washington," Lee read aloud with obvious doubt in his voice. "Says here you live at 847 Maple Street, that's in this neighborhood." "That's correct," Maya said calmly. "I live just 3 blocks from here. I was coming home from work at the Science Institute." Murphy leaned down to look at her more closely. "What were you really doing driving around here so late at night? This is a nice neighborhood. People don't usually drive this slow unless they're looking for something." Maya felt a chill run down her spine. She had heard stories like this from friends back on Earth, but she had hoped things would be different on New Terra. "I was driving home from my laboratory. I always drive carefully at night because the alien wildlife sometimes crosses the roads." "Sure you were," Lee said with a nasty laugh. "And I suppose you're really a doctor too. What kind of doctor drives around at midnight?" "I'm a xenobiologist," Maya explained patiently. "I study the plant and animal life on this planet. Sometimes our research requires working late hours." The two officers looked at each other and smirked. Murphy handed her documents back to her, but his expression had grown even more hostile. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." Maya felt her heart begin to race, but she kept her voice steady. "Officers, I haven't done anything wrong. I was simply driving home from work. My address is on my identification, and as you can see, I live in this neighborhood." "I said step out of the car," Murphy repeated, his hand moving closer to his weapon. Maya knew she had no choice. She slowly opened her door and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The night air felt cold against her skin, and she could see lights beginning to turn on in nearby houses. Her neighbors were being woken up by the commotion. "Turn around and put your hands on the car," Lee ordered. "This is completely unnecessary," Maya said, but she did as she was told. "I haven't committed any crime." Murphy began searching her, his hands rough and disrespectful. "We'll decide what's necessary. You were driving suspiciously in a neighborhood where you clearly don't belong." "But I do belong here," Maya said firmly. "I've lived at this address for 8 years. I've contributed more to this colony than most people ever will." "Yeah, right," Lee said. "I bet you don't even have a job. Probably living off colonial welfare and pretending to be something you're not." Maya felt anger rising in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Officers, there seems to be a misunderstanding. If you would just check your database, you would see that I'm a respected member of this community. I'm also a federal judge recently appointed by the governor." Both officers burst out laughing. "A judge?" Murphy said mockingly. "That's the best story I've heard all week. Black woman claiming to be a judge. What's next are you going to tell? You're the governor too?" By now, several of Maya's neighbors had come outside to see what was happening. She could see Dr. Peter Collins from the house across the street and Maria Santos from next door. They looked shocked and confused. "Maya, what's going on?" Dr. Collins called out. "Stay back, sir," Lee shouted at him. "This is police business." "Maya Washington, you're under arrest," Murphy announced, pulling out his handcuffs. "You're being charged with interfering with colonial security protocols and providing false information to officers." "This is ridiculous," Maya said as the cold metal closed around her wrists. "I haven't interfered with anything, and everything I've told you is true." But the officers weren't listening anymore. They pushed her toward their patrol car as her neighbors watched in horror. Maya held her head high, knowing that this moment would be remembered for a long time. She also knew that tomorrow morning, these same officers would discover just how big a mistake they had made. As the patrol car drove away into the night, Maya looked back at her home and her shocked neighbors. She thought about all the work she had done to build a better life on this new world, and all the work still left to do. Tomorrow would bring justice, but tonight belonged to ignorance and hatred. The car disappeared into the darkness, carrying Maya toward a confrontation that would change New Terra Colony forever. The Colonial Security Force Detention Center looked like every jail Maya had ever seen in movies back on Earth. Gray walls, bright lights that never turned off, and the smell of fear mixed with disinfectant. Officers Murphy and Lee pushed her through the heavy metal doors with unnecessary force, their faces still showing the cruel satisfaction they had felt during the arrest. Maya kept her back straight and her head high as they led her to the booking desk. Behind the reinforced glass sat a tired-looking woman with kind eyes and graying hair. Her name tag read, Linda Garcia, Intake Officer. "What are the charges?" Linda asked in a professional voice, though Maya caught a flicker of concern in her expression when she saw the handcuffs. "Interfering with colonial security protocols and providing false information to officers," Murphy announced proudly, as if he had just caught a dangerous criminal. Linda raised an eyebrow. "What exactly did she do?" "Driving suspiciously in the Hills District," Lee added, acting like she belonged there when she obviously didn't. Then she had the nerve to claim she was some kind of doctor and judge. Maya watched Linda's face carefully. The older woman was typing information into her computer, but her expression was growing more troubled with each word the officer spoke. "Name?" Linda asked Maya directly. "Dr. Maya Washington," Maya replied clearly. Linda's fingers stopped moving on the keyboard for just a moment. Her eyes widened slightly, but she quickly looked back at her screen and continued typing. Maya realized that Linda recognized her name, but the intake officer was being careful not to show it in front of Murphy and Lee. "Address? 47 Maple Street, Hills District." Murphy laughed again. She keeps telling that lie, as if someone like her could afford to live in that neighborhood. Linda printed out several forms and handed them to the officers. "She'll be in holding. Cell 3. Processing is complete." As Murphy and Lee prepared to lead Maya away, Linda spoke up quietly. "Officers, I need to remind you that all arrestees have the right to make a phone call within 2 hours of booking. Yeah, we know the rules, Murphy said dismissively. The holding cell was small and cold with concrete walls and a single metal bench. Maya sat down and tried to process what had just happened to her. In all her years of education, research, and public service, she had never experienced anything quite like this. She knew about racism, of course. She had faced it in subtle ways throughout her career. But this was different. This was bold and cruel and public. About an hour later, Linda Garcia appeared at her cell door. She looked around carefully to make sure no other officers were nearby, then she spoke in a low voice. Dr. Washington, I want to apologize for what happened to you tonight. This isn't right. Thank you, Maya said simply. But you don't need to apologize for something you didn't do. Linda unlocked the cell door. Come with me. It's time for your phone call, but I want to talk to you first. She led Maya to a small office behind the booking desk. The room was cluttered with filing cabinets and had pictures of Linda's family on the desk. Linda closed the door and offered Maya a cup of coffee. Dr. Washington, I've been working intake here for 12 years, ever since we first established the detention center. I've seen a lot of arrests, and I know the difference between real crime and something else. Maya sat down in the offered chair. Something else? What happened to you? Tonight isn't the first time I've seen this pattern. Over the past 6 months, there have been at least 8 other arrests just like yours. All successful colonists of color, all arrested in wealthy districts on ridiculous charges, all by the same group of officers. Maya felt a cold anger building in her chest. The same officers? Murphy and Lee are involved in most of them, but they're not working alone. There's a whole network within the security force. They're led by Captain Dale Brooks from the 3rd Precinct. Linda opened a desk drawer and pulled out a thick folder. I've been keeping records even though I probably shouldn't. Look at this. She showed Maya a list of names and dates. Dr. James Kim, arrested for suspicious behavior while jogging in his own neighborhood. Attorney Lisa Brown, arrested for disturbing the peace while having dinner with friends at an expensive restaurant. Engineer Carlos Rivera, arrested for loitering while waiting for his wife outside a jewelry store. All the charges were dropped eventually, Linda continued, but not before these people were humiliated, had their reputations damaged, and in some cases lost job opportunities because of the arrest records. Maya studied the list carefully. She knew some of these people. They were respected members of the community, professionals who had worked hard to build successful lives on New Terra Colony. Why haven't you reported this to someone higher up? Maya asked. Linda laughed bitterly. Captain Brooks is higher up, and he has friends in the colonial administration who think the same way he does. They believe that Earth made a mistake by giving equal rights to everyone, and they don't want to repeat that mistake here on New Terra. What do you mean? Brooks and his supporters think that the colony would be stronger and more stable if it was run entirely by white colonists. They see successful people of color as a threat to their vision of what New Terra should be. So they've been systematically harassing anyone who doesn't fit their idea of who should have power and influence. Maya felt sick to her stomach. And the colonial government allows this? The colonial government doesn't know the full extent of it. Brooks is careful. He makes sure the charges always get dropped eventually, so it looks like innocent mistakes rather than a deliberate pattern. And most of the victims are too embarrassed or afraid to make a big fuss about it. Linda pulled out another document. But you're different, Dr. Washington. You're not just another successful professional. You're the new federal judge for this sector. Your appointment was announced in yesterday's colonial newsletter, though I don't think Murphy and Lee read the newsletter. Maya almost smiled despite the situation. They have no idea who they just arrested. None at all. And tomorrow morning, when you don't show up for your swearing-in ceremony, people are going to start asking questions. Important people. Linda stood up and walked to the window that looked out over the detention center's main floor. Dr. Washington, I need you to know that not everyone in the security force agrees with what Brooks and his people are doing. There are good officers here who believe in justice and equality, but they're afraid to speak out because Brooks has too much power. What do you think I should do? Maya asked. I think you should let this play out exactly as it's supposed to. Tomorrow morning you'll be taken to court for your arraignment. The judge will be Well, the judge will be you, though they don't know that yet. When the truth comes out, it's going to create a scandal that Brooks won't be able to cover up. Linda returned to her desk and handed Maya a business card. This is the direct number for District Attorney Carmen Rodriguez. She's been trying to investigate these incidents for months, but she hasn't had enough evidence to build a case. Your arrest might be exactly what she needs. Maya tucked the card into her pocket. Thank you for telling me all this. And thank you for keeping records. Without people like you, injustice would never be exposed. I just hope it makes a difference, Linda said sadly. This colony was supposed to be humanity's fresh start, a chance to build something better than what we left behind on Earth. Instead, we brought all our worst problems with us. As Linda prepared to escort Maya back to her cell, she paused at the door. Dr. Washington, there's something else you should know. Your arrest was recorded by the security cameras in your neighborhood. The footage is already spreading through the colony's communication networks. By morning, everyone will know what happened to you. Maya nodded. Good. Injustice thrives in darkness, but it dies in the light. Back in her cell, Maya lay down on the hard bench and stared at the ceiling. She thought about her parents back on Earth, who had worked so hard to give her opportunities they never had. She thought about her students and colleagues, who looked up to her as an example of what was possible through education and determination. Most of all, she thought about tomorrow morning, when Officers Murphy and Lee would walk into her courtroom, expecting to face a sympathetic judge. They had no idea that the woman they had humiliated and arrested would be sitting behind the bench, wearing the black robes of federal authority. Maya closed her eyes and tried to rest. Tomorrow would bring justice, but first it would bring a reckoning that would shake New Terra Colony to its foundations. The morning sun of New Terra cast strange purple light through the tall windows of Federal Courtroom 7. The room was already crowded with people even though it was only 8 in the morning. Word of Dr. Maya Washington's arrest had spread quickly, through the colony's networks overnight, and everyone wanted to see what would happen next. Officers Murphy and Lee sat at a table near the front of the courtroom, looking relaxed and confident. They wore their best uniforms and had satisfied smiles on their faces. Captain Dale Brooks sat behind them in the first row, nodding approvingly at his 2 officers. He was a large man with gray hair and cold eyes who had run the 3rd Precinct for almost 10 years. This should be quick and easy, Murphy whispered to Lee. Judge Washington is probably some soft liberal who will lecture us about sensitivity and then dismiss all charges. Brooks said the same thing, Lee replied quietly. He told me these academic types never want to make waves. They just want everyone to get along. Neither officer had bothered to research anything about the judge who would hear their case. They assumed that since the defendant was a black woman, the judge would automatically side with law and order. This was how things had always worked before. District Attorney Carmen Rodriguez sat at the prosecution table, looking through a thick file of documents. She was a sharp-featured woman in her 40s who had moved to New Terra Colony 5 years ago to escape the corruption she had seen in Earth's legal system. When Linda Garcia had called her at dawn with the news about Maya's arrest, Carmen had immediately started building her case. The courtroom continued to fill with spectators. Dr. Peter Collins sat in the 3rd row, still shocked by what he had witnessed the night before. Maria Santos was there too, along with dozens of other neighbors from the Hills District. Scientists from the Colonial Institute filled several rows, many of them Maya's colleagues and former students. Near the back of the room, Linda Garcia sat, quietly, holding the folder of evidence she had been collecting for months. Next to her was a young reporter from the Colony News Network who had arrived before sunrise to cover what was already being called the trial of the century. At exactly 9 o'clock, the bailiff stood up and called out in a loud voice, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Maya Washington." Murphy and Lee stood up along with everyone else, but they were not paying attention to the bailiff's words. They were too busy talking quietly about their plans for later that day. Brooks was reading something on his tablet and barely looked up. Then Maya walked through the door behind the judge's bench. She wore the black robes of a federal judge, and her natural hair was pulled back in a dignified style. Her posture was straight and proud, and her dark eyes swept across the packed courtroom with calm authority. When her gaze fell on Murphy and Lee, her expression remained perfectly neutral, but several people in the audience gasped out loud. Murphy's mouth fell open, his face went completely white, and he grabbed Lee's arm so hard that his partner winced in pain. Lee stared at Maya as if he was seeing a ghost. Behind them, Captain Brooks dropped his tablet, and the sound of it hitting the floor echoed through the suddenly silent courtroom. Maya sat down behind the bench and arranged her papers carefully. She took her time, allowing the full impact of the moment to sink in for everyone present. When she finally looked up, her voice was clear and professional. "Good morning. This court is now in session. We are here today for the arraignment of Officers Ryan Murphy and Kevin Lee of the Colonial Security Force. Officers, please stand." Murphy and Lee struggled to their feet. Both men were shaking visibly, and Murphy had to lean on the table for support. The confident smiles they had worn just moments before were completely gone. "Your Honor," Lee stammered, "there must be some mistake. We didn't know. We never intended." Maya held up her hand for silence. "Officer Lee, you will have plenty of time to speak when it is appropriate. Right now, I am simply conducting this arraignment according to proper legal procedure." She looked down at the documents in front of her. "Officers Murphy and Lee, you are charged with false imprisonment, violation of civil rights under Colonial Charter Section 12, and conduct unbecoming of Colonial security personnel. These are serious charges that could result in significant penalties if you are found guilty." Captain Brooks suddenly stood up from his seat in the audience. "Your Honor, I request that you recuse yourself from this case. You clearly have a personal interest in the outcome that would prevent you from being impartial." The entire courtroom turned to look at Brooks. Maya studied him calmly for a long moment before responding. "Captain Brooks, I am the only federal judge assigned to this sector of New Terra Colony. Even if I wanted to recuse myself, there is no other judge available to hear this case. However, I can assure you and everyone else in this courtroom that I am perfectly capable of separating my personal experiences from my judicial duties." She leaned forward slightly. "In fact, Captain Brooks, I would argue that my personal experience gives me a unique understanding of exactly what crimes were committed and why they must be addressed by this court." District Attorney Rodriguez stood up. "Your Honor, if I may." "Address the court?" "You may proceed, Counselor Rodriguez." "Your Honor, the people of New Terra Colony have been waiting for justice in cases like this for many months. Dr. Washington's arrest last night was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of harassment and intimidation that has been targeting successful colonists of color throughout our community." Rodriguez opened her file and pulled out Linda Garcia's carefully documented records. "We have evidence of at least 8 similar arrests over the past 6 months, all involving the same group of officers, all targeting prominent citizens who happen to be people of color." Murphy's lawyer, a nervous young man named Tom Bradley, jumped to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This arraignment should only deal with the specific charges against my clients, not unrelated incidents." Maya considered this for a moment. "Counselor Bradley, while I understand your concern, I believe the prosecutor's comments are relevant to establishing the context of these charges. However, I will not allow this arraignment to become a trial of other cases. We will focus on the specific incident that occurred last night." She turned her attention back to Murphy and Lee. "Officers, how do you plead to the charges against you?" Murphy and Lee looked at each other desperately. They had expected this to be a simple formality, but now they realized they were facing a real legal battle against a judge who had experienced their behavior firsthand. "Not guilty, Your Honor," Bradley answered for both of them. "Very well. This case will proceed to trial. Given the serious nature of these charges and the public interest in this case, I am setting a trial date for 2 weeks from today. That will give both sides adequate time to prepare their arguments." Maya looked directly at Murphy and Lee. "Officers, you are released on your own recognizance, but you are hereby suspended from duty pending the outcome of this trial. You are also ordered to have no contact with any witnesses or potential witnesses in this case." She turned to Captain Brooks. "Captain, I am also issuing a court order for you to preserve all records related to arrests made by Officers Murphy and Lee over the past year. Any destruction or alteration of these records will be considered contempt of court." Brooks' face was red with anger, but he nodded stiffly. Maya stood up and everyone in the courtroom rose with her. This court is adjourned. We will reconvene in 2 weeks for the trial that will determine not just the fate of these 2 officers, but the kind of justice system we want to build on New Terra Colony. As Maya left the courtroom, the audience erupted in excited conversation. Murphy and Lee sat slumped in their chairs, finally understanding the magnitude of their mistake. They had arrested the very person who would now decide their fate, and, in doing so, they had created a moment that would be remembered in colonial history forever. Outside the courtroom, reporters surrounded District Attorney Rodriguez, asking questions about the upcoming trial. But Maya slipped quietly out a side door, knowing that the real work was just beginning. 2 weeks later, Federal Courtroom 7 was packed beyond capacity. People stood in the aisles and crowded around the doors, trying to get a glimpse of what had become the most important trial in New Terra Colony's short history. News crews from across human space had traveled to cover the case, and live broadcasts were being sent back to Earth and the other colonies. Maya entered the courtroom wearing her black robes, walking with the same dignity she had shown throughout the ordeal. The past 2 weeks had been difficult for her. She had received hundreds of messages of support, but also dozens of death threats from people who believed she should not be allowed to judge the officers who arrested her. Some colonists had even protested outside her home, holding signs that said things like "Judges should be fair" and "Step down now." But Maya had also received support from unexpected places. Scientists from around the colony had written letters describing her contributions to their research. Students she had mentored years ago sent messages telling how she had changed their lives. Even some security officers had quietly reached out to express their shame about what Murphy and Lee had done. District Attorney Carmen Rodriguez sat at the prosecution table with a mountain of evidence. Over the past 2 weeks, Linda Garcia had come forward officially with her documentation of the pattern of racist arrests. Other victims had found the courage to speak publicly about their experiences. The case had grown far beyond just one night's incident. At the defense table, officers Murphy and Lee sat with their lawyer Tom Bradley. Both men looked thin and tired. The past 2 weeks had been a nightmare for them. Their suspension from the UAE security force meant they had no income, and the constant media attention had made it impossible for them to go anywhere without being recognized. Lee's wife had moved back to Earth with their children, saying she could not handle the shame. Murphy's girlfriend had broken up with him after seeing the arrest video that was now being shown on news programs across human space. Captain Dale Brooks sat in the front row behind the defense table, but he looked uncomfortable. An internal investigation had begun into his role in the systematic harassment of minority colonists. Several officers under his command had been suspended, and there were rumors that he would soon be forced to retire. Maya called the court to order and addressed the packed room. Ladies and gentlemen, this trial will determine whether officers Murphy and Lee violated the civil rights of Dr. Maya Washington and broke their oath to serve and protect all colonists equally. I want to make it clear that this court will follow the law exactly, regardless of any personal feelings I might have about this case. She looked directly at Murphy and Lee. The defendants will receive every protection that the law provides. They will have the right to defend themselves, to question witnesses, and to present their own evidence. That is how justice works, even when it is difficult. District Attorney Rodriguez stood to give her opening statement. Your Honor, this case is about more than just one night and 2 officers. It is about what kind of society we want to build here on New Terra Colony. The evidence will show that officers Murphy and Lee arrested Dr. Washington, not because she committed any crime, but because they could not believe that a black woman could be successful enough to live in a wealthy neighborhood. Rodriguez walked over to a large screen that had been set up in the courtroom. We will show you video evidence of the arrest. We will present testimony from Dr. Washington's neighbors who witnessed the incident, and we will demonstrate that this was not an isolated event, but part of a deliberate pattern of harassment targeting successful colonists of color. The prosecutor clicked a button, and the screen showed the security camera footage from Maya's neighborhood. The courtroom watched in silence as Murphy and Lee pulled Maya over, searched her roughly, and arrested her despite her calm cooperation. Several people in the audience gasped when they heard Murphy laugh and say that Maya was probably living on welfare. When the video ended, Rodriguez continued, "Your Honor, Dr. Washington has spent 15 years serving this colony. She has made discoveries that have helped us understand this planet's ecosystem and keep our settlement safe. She has trained dozens of young scientists and contributed to research that has benefited all of humanity. Yet officers Murphy and Lee treated her like a criminal simply because of the color of her skin." Defense attorney Bradley stood up for his opening statement. He looked nervous and unprepared. "Your Honor, my clients are good officers who made an honest mistake. They were doing their job, patrolling a neighborhood where there had been reports of suspicious activity. When they saw someone driving slowly late at night, they investigated. That is what police officers are supposed to do." Bradley gestured toward Murphy and Lee. "These men have served this colony faithfully for years. They have risked their lives to keep our streets safe. Yes, they made errors in judgment that night, but they did not act out of hatred or prejudice. They were simply trying to protect the community." Maya listened carefully to both opening statements, taking notes and maintaining her professional demeanor. When both lawyers finished, she called the first witness. "The prosecution may call its first witness. Your Honor, the people call Dr. Peter Collins." Maya's neighbor walked slowly to the witness stand. He was an older man with white hair and kind eyes, a retired engineer who had helped design many of the colony's most important buildings. "Dr. Collins," Rodriguez began, "please, tell the court what you witnessed on the night of Dr. Washington's arrest." Collins spoke in a clear voice. "I was awakened by flashing lights outside my window. When I looked out, I saw Maya being searched by 2 officers. I have known Maya for 8 years. She is one of the most respected people in our neighborhood. I could not understand why she was being treated like a criminal." "What did you hear the officers say to Dr. Washington?" "They were very rude to her. They did not believe she lived in our neighborhood. One of them laughed when she said she was a doctor. They acted like she was lying about everything, even though her identification clearly showed her address." Rodriguez showed Collins a photograph of Maya's house. "Is this Dr. Washington's home?" "Yes, that is Maya's house. She has lived there longer than I have. She takes excellent care of her property and is a wonderful neighbor. She often helps elderly residents with their gardens and has organized neighborhood events to help people get to know each other." During cross-examination, Bradley tried to suggest that Collins had not seen everything clearly, but the old engineer remained firm in his testimony. The next witness was Maria Santos, Maya's next-door neighbor. She told a similar story about what she had witnessed, and she became emotional when describing how shocked she was to see Maya being handcuffed. "Dr. Washington is like family to us," Maria said through tears. "When my husband was sick last year, she drove us to the hospital and stayed with us all night. She is one of the kindest people I have ever known. Seeing her treated that way broke my heart." Rodriguez then called Linda Garcia to the stand. The intake officer brought her folder of documented arrests and explained the pattern she had discovered. "Your Honor, I have been keeping records because I knew something was wrong. In the past 6 months, there have been 8 arrests of successful colonists of color in wealthy neighborhoods. All were arrested by the same group of officers. All had the charges dropped eventually, but not before they suffered embarrassment and professional damage." Garcia opened her folder and read the names and details. Dr. James Kim, arrested while jogging in his own neighborhood. Attorney Lisa Brown, arrested at a restaurant where she was having dinner with colleagues. Engineer Carlos Rivera, arrested while waiting for his wife outside a store. The pattern is clear and undeniable. The courtroom listened in shocked silence as Garcia described case after case of harassment. Maya watched the faces of the spectators and saw anger, sadness, and determination. When Rodriguez finished presenting her evidence, she stood before the court one final time. "Your Honor, the evidence shows that Officers Murphy and Lee did not make an honest mistake. They participated in a systematic campaign to intimidate and humiliate successful colonists of color. This behavior has no place in a just society, and it certainly has no place among those sworn to protect and serve all citizens equally." As the first day of testimony ended, Maya looked out at the packed courtroom. She saw faces of every color and background, all united in their demand for justice. This trial had become about more than just her arrest. It had become about the soul of New Terra Colony and what kind of future humanity would build among the stars. The trial continued for 3 more days, and each day brought new revelations that shocked the colony. Defense attorney Bradley tried his best to defend Murphy and Lee, but the evidence against them was overwhelming. Video recordings, witness, testimony, and documented patterns of behavior all painted a clear picture of systematic harassment. On the second day, Bradley called Murphy to testify in his own defense. The officer looked nervous as he walked to the witness stand, avoiding eye contact with Maya. "Officer Murphy," Bradley began, "please tell the court why you stopped Dr. Washington that night." Murphy spoke in a quiet voice. "We had received reports of suspicious activity in the Hills District. When I saw someone driving slowly late at night, I thought it was worth investigating." "What reports?" Rodriguez asked during cross-examination. Murphy shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Well, there had been some break-ins in the area recently." Rodriguez pulled out a file. "Officer Murphy, I have checked with the Security Force Records Department. There were no reported break-ins in the Hills District for 3 months before Dr. Washington's arrest. Were you lying just now, or were you lying the night you arrested her?" Murphy's face turned red. I might have been mistaken about the timing of the reports." "Officer Murphy, when Dr. Washington showed you her identification proving she lived in the neighborhood, why did you not believe her?" "I thought the identification might be fake." "Why would you think that?" "It was an official colonial identification card with security features that are very difficult to forge." Murphy could not give a good answer. His testimony made him look worse instead of better. When Lee testified the next day, he tried to blame Murphy for making the decision to arrest Maya. But Rodriguez had recordings of both officers laughing and making cruel comments during the arrest. The evidence showed that both men had enjoyed humiliating Maya. The most damaging testimony came from Officer Ben Clark, a young security officer who had worked with Murphy and Lee. Clark had been struggling with his conscience for weeks, and he finally decided to tell the truth. "Your Honor," Clark said nervously, "I need to tell the court about conversations I heard in the security force break room. Captain Brooks often talked about how successful minorities were a threat to colonial security. He said that Earth had made a mistake by giving equal rights to everyone and that New Terra should be run differently." Clark looked directly at Maya. "Officer Murphy and Lee talked about Dr. Washington specifically before they arrested her. They knew she was going to be appointed as a federal judge, and they did not like it. Murphy said that people like her should know their place." The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Maya had to call for order several times. Captain Brooks stood up angrily and tried to leave, but Maya ordered him to remain seated. "Officer Clark," Rodriguez continued, "did Captain Brooks give specific orders to harass minority colonists? Not direct orders, but he made it clear that such arrests would be rewarded. Officers who arrested successful minorities got better assignments and recommendations for promotion. Those who questioned the practice were given the worst shifts and transferred to undesirable posts." The testimony revealed a conspiracy that went far deeper than anyone had imagined. Phone records showed that Brooks had been in contact with other precinct captains who shared his views. They had been coordinating their efforts across the entire colony. Outside the courtroom, protests were growing larger each day. Some colonists demanded that Maya step down as judge, claiming she could not be fair. But many more supported her, carrying signs that read, "Justice for all," and "Maya Washington is our judge." Maya received threatening messages every day, but she also received thousands of letters of support from across human space. Scientists on Earth wrote to praise her contributions to xenobiology. Legal scholars analyzed her handling of the trial and declared it a model of judicial fairness. On the 4th day of the trial, Maya faced her greatest challenge. A group of colonial administrators led by Deputy Governor Frank Morrison filed a formal petition demanding that she recuse herself from the case. Morrison stood before the court wearing an expensive suit and an arrogant expression. "Your Honor, the colonial administration believes that your personal involvement in this case makes it impossible for you to render fair judgment. For the good of the colony, you should step aside and allow another judge to complete this trial. Maya looked at Morrison calmly. Deputy Governor Morrison, as I explained at the beginning of this trial, I am the only federal judge assigned to this sector. There is no other judge available. Then we request that a judge be brought in from another sector, Morrison replied. That would delay this trial for months while travel arrangements are made. Justice delayed is justice denied, Deputy Governor. These officers have the right to a speedy trial, and the victims of their crimes deserve prompt resolution. Maya stood up and addressed the packed courtroom. But more importantly, I want to address the underlying concern about my ability to be impartial. Some people believe that because I was personally harmed by these officers, I cannot judge them fairly. I disagree. She walked to the front of the bench so she could see everyone in the courtroom. Who better to understand the full impact of these crimes than someone who experienced them personally? Who better to ensure that justice is done than someone who knows exactly what injustice feels like? Maya's voice grew stronger as she continued. I have spent my entire career studying life and learning how different species adapt and survive. One thing I have learned is that the strongest ecosystems are diverse ecosystems. When one species tries to dominate all others, the entire system becomes weak and eventually collapses. She looked directly at Morrison and Brooks. The same principle applies to human societies. When one group tries to dominate all others based on nothing but the color of their skin, the entire society becomes weak. We came to New Terra Colony to build something better than what we left behind on Earth. But some people want to travel 300 light years just to repeat Earth's worst mistakes. The courtroom was completely silent as Maya returned to her seat. This court will not delay justice to satisfy those who are uncomfortable with equality. Deputy Governor Morrison, your petition is denied. This trial will continue with me as the presiding judge. Morrison left the courtroom angrily, but most of the spectators applauded Maya's words. The next day, both sides presented their closing arguments. Rodriguez summarized the overwhelming evidence of guilt and urged Maya to send a strong message that discrimination would not be tolerated on New Terra Colony. Bradley made a final desperate plea for mercy, arguing that his clients were products of their environment and deserved a second chance. When all the arguments were finished, Maya announced that she would deliver her verdict the following morning. That night, she sat alone in her chambers reviewing all the evidence and testimony. She thought about the responsibility that rested on her shoulders and the impact her decision would have on the future of the colony. Outside her window, the alien stars of New Terra's sky shone down on a world that was waiting to learn what kind of justice would prevail among the stars. Maya knew that tomorrow's verdict would be remembered for generations, and she was determined to make sure it was a verdict that humanity could be proud of. The morning of the verdict, Federal Courtroom 7 was so crowded that people lined the hallways outside. News reporters from across human space waited with their cameras ready. The entire colony seemed to hold its breath as Maya entered the courtroom. For the final time in this historic trial, Maya had spent the night carefully considering her decision. The evidence was clear, but the sentencing would determine what kind of message New Terra Colony would send to the galaxy about justice and equality. All rise for the Honorable Judge Maya Washington, the bailiff announced. Maya took her seat and looked out at the packed courtroom. She saw faces filled with hope, anger, fear, and determination. In the front row, Linda Garcia sat with her folder of evidence, representing all the victims who had suffered in silence. District Attorney Rodriguez waited at her table, knowing that this verdict would define her career and the colony's future. Officers Murphy and Lee sat at the defense table, both men looking pale and defeated. Over the past week, they had heard testimony that revealed the full scope of their crimes and the conspiracy they had been part of. Captain Brooks sat behind them, his career already over thanks to the internal investigation that had exposed his network of corrupt officers. In the matter of New Terra Colony versus officers Ryan Murphy and Kevin Lee, Maya began in a clear, strong voice. This court has heard extensive evidence over the past week. The testimony has revealed not just the specific crimes committed against Dr. Maya Washington, but a pattern of systematic harassment targeting successful colonists of color. She paused and looked directly at Murphy and Lee. The evidence presented in this court shows beyond any reasonable doubt that on the night in question, Officers Murphy and Lee violated my civil rights, falsely imprisoned me, and conducted themselves in a manner that brought shame to their uniforms and their oath to serve and protect all citizens equally. The courtroom was completely silent except for the quiet hum of recording equipment. Therefore, this court finds Officers Ryan Murphy and Kevin Lee guilty on all charges: false imprisonment, violation of civil rights under Colonial Charter Section 12, and conduct unbecoming of colonial security personnel. Several people in the audience applauded, but Maya called for order. However, the question of guilt is only the beginning. The more difficult question is what justice requires in this case. Maya stood up and walked to the front of the bench. I could sentence these officers to the maximum penalty allowed by law. I could order them imprisoned and ensure they never work in law enforcement again. Some people believe that is what justice demands. She looked at Murphy and Lee, who were both staring at the floor. But justice is not just about punishment. Justice is about healing, learning, and making sure that such crimes never happen again. Maya returned to her seat. Officer Murphy and Officer Lee, you will each serve 200 hours of community service working directly with the communities you have harmed. You will work with minority-owned businesses, volunteer at schools in low-income neighborhoods, and assist with programs that help new colonists integrate into our society. The two officers looked up in surprise. They had expected much harsher punishment. You will also complete 40 hours of education about the history of civil rights and the importance of equality in human society. This education will be supervised by Dr. Patricia Williams from the Colonial University's Department of Social Justice. Maya's voice became stern. You are both permanently banned from working in law enforcement anywhere in human space. Your actions have shown that you cannot be trusted with the authority that comes with a police officer's badge. She turned to Captain Brooks. Captain Brooks, you are hereby ordered to appear before this court next week to face charges related to your role in organizing and encouraging the systematic harassment of minority colonists. Your pension and benefits are suspended pending the outcome of that trial. Maya looked out at the packed courtroom. But this case is about more than just punishment. It is about what kind of society we want to build here on New Terra Colony. She gestured to the windows that showed the alien landscape outside. We traveled 300 light years to reach this world. We left behind everything we knew to build something better among the stars. The greatest tragedy would be if we brought our worst prejudices with us and repeated the same mistakes that plagued humanity on Earth. Maya's voice grew stronger and more passionate. Today, this court declares that New Terra Colony will be a place where all people are judged by their character and contributions, not by the color of their skin. It will be a place where justice is blind to race but not blind to injustice. The courtroom erupted in applause, and this time, Maya allowed it to continue for several moments before calling for order. This court is now adjourned, Maya announced. As people filed out of the courtroom, many stopped to shake Maya's hand or offer words of support. Dr. Collins and Maria Santos both hugged her, tears in their eyes. Linda Garcia approached the bench and handed Maya her folder of evidence. Your Honor, Linda said quietly, I want you to have this. It represents months of careful documentation, but more importantly, it represents hope that justice would eventually prevail. Maya accepted the folder with gratitude. Thank you, Linda. Your courage in keeping these records made this trial possible. 6 months later, New Terra Colony had become a model for other human settlements throughout the galaxy. The Washington Protocols for Police Accountability had been adopted by dozens of other colonies. Officer training programs now included mandatory education about civil rights and cultural sensitivity. Murphy had completed his community service and left New Terra Colony to work in civilian security on a mining station. The experience had changed him, and he often spoke to new security recruits about the importance of treating all people with respect. Lee had a different reaction to his sentence. The community service had opened his eyes to the damage his actions had caused. He became an advocate for police reform and traveled to other colonies to speak about his experiences. His testimony helped prevent similar incidents from occurring elsewhere. Captain Brooks was found guilty of conspiracy and abuse of power. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison and permanently banned from any position of authority in colonial government. Maya returned to her dual role as judge and scientist. Her research laboratory had become a symbol of excellence and diversity, with students and researchers from across human space applying to work with her. Her judicial decisions were studied in law schools throughout the galaxy as examples of fairness and wisdom. One evening, as Maya worked late in her laboratory, she received a video call from Earth. The caller was Dr. Elizabeth Johnson, director of the Global Justice Project, an organization working to reform police practices on humanity's home world. "Dr. Washington," Johnson said with excitement, "I wanted to let you know that your trial has inspired major reforms here on Earth. 3 countries have adopted versions of the Washington Protocols, and police departments worldwide are studying your case as an example of how justice should work." Maya smiled as she looked out at the alien landscape of New Terra Colony. The purple grass swayed in the evening breeze, and the blue night-blooming flowers were beginning to open. This world had taught humanity many things about adaptation and survival. But perhaps the most important lesson was that diversity made everything stronger. "Dr. Johnson," Maya replied, "the real credit belongs to everyone who had the courage to speak up for justice. From Linda Garcia keeping records in a jail cell to Officer Clark deciding to tell the truth, this victory belongs to all of us." As the call ended, Maya returned to her research. She was studying how different plant species on New Terra Colony work together to create resilient ecosystems. The parallels to human society were not lost on her. When different groups cooperated and supported each other, both plants and people thrived. Outside her window, the lights of New Terra City sparkled under alien stars. Children of every background played in the streets, growing up in a world where equality was not just a dream, but a reality. Humanity had traveled to the stars and discovered that its greatest strength was not its technology or its courage, but its ability to learn, grow, and become better than it had been before. Maya Washington had faced injustice and hatred, but she had responded with wisdom and fairness. In doing so, she had helped humanity take another step toward becoming worthy of the stars.